do with my son?
What did you do with my son? What did you do with my son? Where is he? Where is my baby?
I hope you remember rats eating my son's face in your refrigeration system. 1,178 people want answers, John. We're not gonna stop. Do we have to start digging up grave sites with spoons?
This is a story of loss, laughter, and deceit.
So if you're ever dead in Colorado, come to Return to Nature Funeral Home, where they'll take good care of you.
A green funeral home in central Colorado hides a horrifying secret.
There are bodies decomposing, literally stacked everywhere.
We're focusing on our investigation and our victims.
My son was covered with dozens of bodies and left there to rot for 4 years.
I believe those ashes are human, but I believe they are not my human. Where's my son?
A search for the owners reveals a pattern of surprising behavior.
Apparently, he would go tell jokes on stage.
Loser.
Who breaks into a sleepover and holds them at gunpoint? He exhibits all the characteristics of a psychopath.
They had this face that they were putting onto the world, and it was all.
How dare they do this to my big brother? We had no leads on them. Where are John and Carrie?
They kidnapped my son.
I've never seen that type of wasp before. The insects are my favorite thing out here, you guys. I mean, the grasshoppers, whatever. But the wasps and ants, woo, I find them fascinating.
Oh, the horses are out, you guys. Oh, great.
Yeah. I was telling family, I'm going to charge extra if you want the horses here. My name is Emily Miller. I'm a licensed funeral director. I'm the founder of Colorado Burial Preserve in Florence. Colorado Burial Preserve and Cremation Garden is a cemetery. It's 80 acres, and the idea is that people would sort of experience everything here that you might expect from a nature preserve, but also we can meet every need that you might need from a cemetery as well. We use the term natural burial to talk about a final interment where everything is biodegradable. So that means there's no embalming chemicals, nothing that's going to stop the body from returning to the soil in the most natural way. You can see the plants where the loved one's being returned to the earth. It's going to nourish new life in that very spot.
Green burial is a growing market in America. In a recent study, 60% of people under the age of 40 say that this is something they would consider when their time comes. And another operation, a green funeral home in central Colorado called Return to Nature, is capitalizing on the trend.
It's called Return to Nature Funeral Home. This is where you would come see your loved ones.
This is terribly uncomfortable.
Return to Nature is owned by John and Carrie Halford, a married couple who pride themselves on a light, modern approach to their work.
Come in here with me. Come here, baby.
No.
I'm John Halford. I'm co-owner of Return to Nature Funeral Home here in Colorado Springs, a third generation of funeral service.
John was raised in the business. His father operated a funeral home in Wagoner, Oklahoma.
Eternity
Yeah, my own.
You should have your own.
I'm Carrie Halford. I'm a co-owner of this funeral home, and I'm actually not a funeral director by trade. I just coincidentally married somebody in the business. So.
And you've dated people in the business before that, too.
Very
No. Don't leave them out of this.
I don't know what it is. I'm drawn to it.
Yes, is that it?
The couple, both of whom had been previously married, opened Return to Nature in 2017.
We had decided well before any of this green that we were going to put in a funeral home because we genuinely believe we can do a better job of serving the public here than anybody else in town. And I still firmly believe that.
My name is Angelica Stedman, and I live in Pueblo, Colorado. My daughter, Chanel, she was a pretty lively person since she was little. She loved playing outdoors. She built her own little fort. At one time, she came in, and a porcupine had occupied her fort.
Did you get it out?
Yeah, we did get the porcupine out. It was more scared of us. My daughter, Chanel, was a very beautiful young lady. Chanel passed away November 23rd of 2019. I loved my daughter very much. And I still miss her. So it was really important for me to find a funeral home that would take care of her. I came across Return to Nature, offering services, including the cremation. When I met John and Carrie Halford, they seemed sincere. Their professionalism and their empathy was making me feel secure. We planned a small memorial service. John is the one that spoke at the service. It was very nice the way he had put things together. They really did a nice job.
This is, I think, oh my gosh, Charlie Cat by Zach DeWolf. Charlie Cat was a fearless cat. He wasn't even afraid of a dog. One day, there was a mouse named Rough Mouse, and he beat up Charlie Cat. My name is Heather DeWolf. I'm the mother of 3 boys. Zach was my oldest. I like to think of him as a rebel with a really good heart.
That's such a great picture. He looks like a middle-aged man in that picture.
When my son, Zach, died in 2020, I think I spoke to a family member. He gave me the name of Return to Nature. And one of the big draws for them was they would plant a tree in Zach's name in Pikes Peak National Forest. And that clicked with me instantly because one of the things that he and I did together was we went and planted a couple of trees. It was one of the funnest things that we had ever done together. I was looking for cremation services only. And so when I called them, and they were so kind, I explained the situation and they were so compassionate. And when I got off the phone, I just cried because I felt like they were very compassionate and I felt that they would take care of my son.
This is my son, David Jackson Page, and I love this picture of him. He looks so carefree and so much at peace in this picture. And this is also David. This is the cremated remains of my son. We actually received my son's cremated remains just shortly before his funeral service at the end of October. And I really felt this sense of peace because I knew that my son had really struggled. And I felt like in his passing, he could finally be at peace. He could finally rest. So I would go on these grand adventures all over the country and spread him in the most beautiful places. He was the first person to see the sunrise in Acadia in Maine, and the last person to see the sunset every day in Olympia in Washington. But I still never felt like it was enough somehow. I didn't feel like I had laid him to rest. And I think what you'll find with a lot of our families is we all felt that. We felt that there was something missing. We didn't know it was our loved ones missing, but something was.
By all outward appearances, the Halfords in their 2 Return to Nature locations were doing well until the spring of 2023, when signs emerged that something was amiss at their facility in Penrose.
What concerned me first about them was the way the Penrose location was starting to look on the outside. It was starting to look like a derelict building. The weeds were growing up out of the parking lot. And so I emailed John to say, long time no talk. I sort of thought I could offer a favor. Hey, I'll mow the weeds in your parking lot if I could source some equipment behind the funeral home. And he emailed me back a couple days later and said, no, actually, come April 1st, we've sublet the building. Sorry, thanks for the offer about your mowing. Won't be able to help you with your equipment.
My name's Tyler Cunnington. I'm a reporter and multimedia journalist for KRDO 13 News in Colorado Springs. We're an ABC affiliate. So on that night of October 3rd in 2023, our chief investigative reporter got a tip from some sources she has that the Fremont County sheriffs were going to execute a warrant at this Return to Nature funeral home. So from what we were told, there were neighbors in the area that live near the plot of land, where the funeral home is. They basically started to just make some complaints of, hey, it's starting to smell a little funky. You don't know what's going on. We know it's a funeral home. There was a sign on one of the fences attached to the building that does say taxidermy practiced here. Maybe it's just kind of smelling and people aren't used to it. And so those complaints went to the state, ultimately made their way up to the state. The Department of Regulatory Agencies, DORA, oversees dozens of professions, which include the funeral home industry in Colorado. And so DORA gets this complaint. They got in contact with the owners saying, hey, we've gotten some of these complaints. Would you mind just being able to meet us and kind of show us around the funeral home? To our knowledge, he agreed to do that. He would meet them there. So DORA investigators shows up the next day on Wednesday, October 4th, but Johnny doesn't meet them to let them in and show them around. So they said, okay, well, we need to get a warrant. So they get that warrant and they come back later that night. Sheriffs opened that front door and were presented with, something you couldn't even dream of. They basically said there are bodies decomposing, literally stacked everywhere. This was just appalling, just shocking. No one knew what was about to come out of this. Tonight, the small town of Penrose, just over 3,000 people, is the site of a massive tragedy. So we were there, first to break the story, first on scene, and from our understanding, the sheriffs opened that front door and they basically said there are bodies literally stacked everywhere. And the entire floor was covered in probably shin-deep brown sludge, which was really a mixture of decomposition matter, body fluids, blood, you name it. I had to go in wearing hazmat suits because the coroner would later call it a, quote, biohazard inside. It's just one of those memories that I'll always carry from this story, which is standing there and having flies buzzing around everywhere. And the smell coming from the building was unmistakable. Not that I know what a dead body smells like, but this gave me a pretty good idea. So Friday comes along, and there's a press conference announced.
With regard to the investigation, there have been no arrests to date, and we don't want to speculate about arrests or possible charges at this time. We're focusing on our investigation and our victims.
One of the reporters asked, have you been in touch with the owners? And they said, yes. They said, have they been cooperative? They said, so far, yes.
This is so horrible. Look, death isn't pretty. And one job of the funeral business is to shield that fact from the family so they can focus on the memory of their loved one. But an event like this almost forces you to peel back that curtain. Like, how is the industry supposed to run? And what the heck was going on here?
I think there's 4 or 5 stipulations of things you have to do with a dead body after you receive it. You have to embalm them, put them into refrigeration, give it to science, or cremate it. Essentially, you have to do one of those handful of things within, I think, 24 or 48 hours. In this case, if they're not embalmed, I mean, you have a, quite frankly, raw, decomposing body.
Return to Nature claimed to be a green funeral home. So embalming was not a big part of what they did. Most of the business at Return to Nature is for cremation, but the Halfords don't have the facility to do that. So they'll take the bodies in and store them and then send them out to someone who operates a crematorium. Refrigeration should have been a huge part of their operation, but investigators find a serious issue with their equipment.
My name is Blanca Eberhardt. I've been a mortician for the last 20 years, and I work for the state of Colorado for emergency preparedness and response. If you picture a restaurant cooler, the gray walls, the gray door, if you picture that type of setup, John had those in the 3 rooms, but they weren't operating. They didn't have the compressor. They didn't have all the mechanisms to be a cooler. It was just the shell of the cooler. And those shells of the cooler were filled with bodies. And it was as if they were just piled on top of each other. So it just makes you question, what was he doing with the loved ones and why was he holding on to them?
So we get the confirmation that there are at least 115 bodies and the identification process was going to be first and foremost. So they go through the identification process and one by one, people were starting to get notified.
I remember seeing something on the news, just in a flash. It said that 115 bodies had been found at a funeral home in Penrose, Colorado. I immediately thought, who do I know? The most important person, of course, to me that's passed would be my son, but that was 4 years ago. There's no way his body would have been found. But I had no idea even then how complex and layered this case would be. So I was notified on October 24th that my son had been identified as one of the victims. I remember just feeling like this punch in my stomach. The coroner told me that my son was left in the building uncovered and exposed. He was dumped out of his body bag, presumably by John Halford, into the corner of an inoperable refrigerator, and then covered with dozens of bodies and left there to rot for 4 years. To have something like this happen, for his body to be left like this, is the ultimate desecration, not only of his body, but in a lot of ways, in the spirit that was David. It's just unspeakable. So when I found out that my son had been identified in the building, I realized that the person that I have been carrying for 4 years isn't my child. This is not my son, David. This could be somebody else's child. I will never know who I've been carrying. Because unfortunately, once the cremation process happens, the DNA is destroyed.
The implications of this are mind-bending. Every single customer of Return to Nature that chose cremation is now left to wonder if what they received are the actual ashes of their loved ones. But it gets worse. A discovery inside Return to Nature leads investigators to believe that some families were given something other than ashes.
There were bags of Quikrete, concrete mix inside the funeral home and a machine to grind that up. And what investigators said and what families have said have led us to essentially go off the notion that the Halfords would allegedly grind up concrete, put that in an urn or a bag, and give that to the families instead of the cremation of their loved one.
The cremains that I received, I don't know what I have. Is it my daughter or is it cement? I have no idea. So I took a little bit of the ashes and I put it in a glass jar and added some water to it. I just left the jar sitting and it solidified like cement does. That showed me that these were not ashes. It was like a knife being stabbed in my heart and twisted. Where is my daughter?
When all of this came about, we needed to try to determine if we had concrete, what is it that we have? And so we were kind of like manipulating the contents. And as we were doing that, something came to the surface. And we were like, what is that? What is that?
Like it's some sort of part of a joint. That's like a bolt.
We have found metal discs, and I don't know what they are. What I do know for certain is that my son had no medical devices inside of his body.
We will never know if the ashes that we have are Zach's. They highly likely aren't. It's despicable, and it pisses me off because how dare they do this to my big brother? How dare they?
I believe I have somebody else. I believe those ashes are human, but I believe they are not my human. If I have somebody else's loved one, where's my son? Who has my son?
As hundreds of victims try to figure out exactly what happened to their loved ones, the focus begins to shift towards the people who seem to be responsible. Return to Nature's owners, John and Carrie Halford. While investigators suggested the couple were being cooperative, frustration is mounting.
So while some of these families are finding out that their loved one has been identified, many of the families are just still left wondering, like, where are John and Carrie? Where are they in all of this? What they've done is abhorrent. While some of these families are finding out that their loved one has been identified, it's announced that there are actually 189 bodies that were found inside. We were able to confirm that there was an investigation into improper storage of bodies, but there was basically no mention or understanding of where the owners were, if there were going to be criminal charges, what was going to be done about this.
You have to remember, this is an active case. So law enforcement's priority is to protect the investigation. When the sheriff stood up there and told the media that John and Carrie Halford were being cooperative, he wasn't entirely forthcoming.
When John failed to meet Dora and the Fremont County coroner at Return to Nature, John and Carrie Halford packed up the family and they left everything. The landlord said you could tell they left in a hurry, food on the table, just packed up and left. John turned off their cell phones, I guess for location purposes.
It's boiling over. People had gone and placed these bright pink, bright green, just poster signs taped to the fence around the funeral home saying, "Where are the Halfords?"
When the Return to Nature event broke, my colleagues and I kind of gathered together and was like, wait, what? So we were doing social media search and posts, and we came across that he was going around trying to be a stand-up comedian.
What? What? I don't think I've ever been so speechless about something.
Apparently, he would go to California and Texas and go tell jokes on stage.
So, I mean, that in and of itself is kind of funny. in a terrible way.
Started the day with a PSS. Post-shower. A post-shower is like when you're in the shower, you're still wet, and you can never get the right amount of dry.
I'm a comedian, and I'm on stage, and I've had people actually believe some of the that I've said on stage
Like
before.
90% of what comes out of your mouth is bull.
More.
This is wild. This guy's in his 40s. He's married and raising kids. He's letting bodies basically rot in his business. And he's pursuing comedy on the side. I think it's fair to say his priorities are messed up.
What I want to know is, what does he think is funny?
I'm a mom. I'm a former call girl. I'm a full brain donor.
Loser. Right?
Other than growing up in the funeral business and graduating mortuary school in 2010, his background's a little murky. In 2006, when John was 26, he attempted to launch a political career by running for the Muskogee City Council in Oklahoma. But an incident occurs during that time that complicates his campaign.
There was a group of ladies having kind of a girls' night slumber party. And him and another gentleman decided to put ski masks on and break in and hold an AK-47 to their heads as a joke. Who breaks into a sleepover and holds them at gunpoint and thinks that anything about that is funny? He exhibits characteristics of a psychopath.
According to press clippings, John pled guilty to a misdemeanor, admitted he used bad judgment, received community service, and then lost his bid for election. Years later, he met Carrie, they married and moved to Colorado.
John and Carrie's social media posts are absolutely absurd.
I think John and Carrie wanted to project an image that they were this perfect, good-looking, fit couple.
So my wife is leaving me and trying to look hot for another guy.
That is not what I said.
What did you say?
I fixed my hair today.
That's literally the same thing.
They went on all these luxurious trips, and they had a $1,500 steak dinner in Vegas. They had cosmetic surgery.
They had this face that they were putting onto the world, that they were this happily married couple, that they were financially well off, and it was all bull.
Eternity
I'm
together.
having my own.
We've already discussed it. We're going to have 2 separate caskets. There's couples who will be buried in the oversized caskets together.
I need my space.
He had this air about him that he was a ladies' man. One of the first people that reached out to me from John's past was his mistress.
My name is and I had a romantic relationship with John Halford for 1.5 years. And in so many ways, I feel so lucky to be alive. I really believe that John is a dangerous man. My dad was diagnosed with cancer in 2017 and passed away in 2019. I personally am very big into zero waste and living a very natural lifestyle. And so I started doing some research about natural burials, and I found Return to Nature. After meeting with John, John immediately started messaging me. He would tell me things like, I just want to talk to you about anything and everything. Tell me anything about you. He would do anything to come see me, anything. At one point, he even offered to bring me a bottle of water. Yes. We spent a lot of time sharing information about each other. John told me that he was the one that performed the bulk of everything behind the scenes. And that for him, it was about genuinely caring for humanity. John made it appear as though Carrie wanted to cut corners to make a profit. John often referred to Carrie as the devil, Satan, He always said that she was a nightmare in his life. There were many times where I knew that John was overwhelmed by the behind the scenes of the funeral home. He had told me that he had built the refrigerator units and that the compressors were consistently going out in the refrigerator units. There was one point where he even told me that the compressor had gone out and he had to take all the bodies out of the refrigerator and lay them around the funeral home while he handled the refrigerator unit. And he actually sent me photos of bodies spread around the funeral home. John was very handy in anything that he needed. If he could build it, he would do that because it was cheaper than purchasing it.
So these malfunctioning refrigerator units are one of the main reasons why these bodies in John's care were rotting. And he knew they were problematic months before the facility was raided, and he never properly fixed them. And why is he sharing this damning information with somebody he just met? Is this some bizarre attempt at manipulation?
Once John started telling me that he was going his separate ways from Carrie, I knew that he was trying to make an approach towards me romantically. When you feel like your whole life is crashing down, you just lost your father, and somebody comes along and makes you feel special, it's very intoxicating. He would come over to my house and we would just hang out. So it all kind of happened at once. He came over. We just talked about energy and like frequencies and vibrations. And because of the magnetism, that's when we began to kiss. And it led to more. And we got carried away. And then after that night, he rushed out and ghosted me.
John is a classic manipulator. He targets her, he mirrors her interests and concerns back to her until he gets what he wants, and then he runs away.
So my best friend called me one day and asked me, "What's the name of John's funeral home?" And I told her, "Return to Nature." And she goes, "They're under investigation from the FBI." I really believe that John is a dangerous man.
This whole situation really paints a picture of a true narcissist who is willing to say or do anything to get what he's after. And it, of course, raises questions about Carrie. Did she know what her husband was up to, in and out of the office?
I think a lot of people assume that John did this and that Carrie was just going along with it to appease her husband somehow. This woman signed the paperwork. This woman met with us face to face. She's the one who promised us that she would take care of our dead. And she knew who he was.
Carrie would sit in the car while he would bring in wheelbarrows of bodies to the Penrose location, even making remarks such as, "I got people juice in my mouth. Can you get me a double cheeseburger and something else for dinner?" Just sort of expressing the casualness and the kind of attitudes they carried while doing these alleged crimes.
Now, based on the coroner's findings, some of the bodies found and returned to nature had been rotting for 4 years. So how did they get away with this for so long? Well, it turns out that Colorado law may have played a surprising part in that.
Colorado does not require anyone practicing funeral directing or embalming a license. So Colorado is the laughingstock in the industry for professional funeral directors and embalmers because of the lack of education and licensing. So the joke would be, if you can't pass your boards, just move to Colorado. Or if you lose your license in another state, just move to Colorado. But I still can't figure out why, though. He knew he was wrong and still took the chance. And that's what the families want to know is why.
It's the first week of November. I'm waking up for a normal day shift. Naturally, as I do, I check my phone. And I got a notification. All I saw was John and Carrie had been arrested. John and Carrie had been arrested. So what we find out is that the FBI found out that the Halfords were out of state. They pieced together that they were staying at John Halford's, father's house in Oklahoma. And so they show up there, they take him and Carrie into custody, and they remained in jail in Wagoner, Oklahoma.
The Halfords were charged by the state with money laundering, forgery, and theft. But they're also charged with 190 counts of abuse of a corpse, each count directly linked to a body discovered inside Return to Nature. But hundreds of customers pass through the doors of Return to Nature, so the number of victims is likely much higher.
My name is not listed as a victim on that case, simply because my son has not been identified. They essentially, in my opinion, kidnapped my son. They have not identified where he is, what they did with him. In my eyes, my son is missing, and it's because they didn't take care of him like they were supposed to. That's a crime.
Just because they have not found bodies does not mean there was no crime committed. And for us, it leaves us out in limbo, in nowhere. We are all victims of Return to Nature Funeral Home.
In January, the Halfords are released on bond. And the following month, after a pretrial hearing, Heather DeWolf and Christina Page confront John outside the courthouse.
What did you do with my son? John. What did you do with my son? What did you do with my son? Where is he?
When our mother chased John Halford down the street, demanding to know what he had done with Zach, I am beyond impressed at her restraint, because if I had been in that situation, I would have jumped on him and I would have torn him apart.
From our understanding, what we later learned is that they were staying in a hotel together, doing takeout to make money and live.
To know that these people are free as a bird, just driving around the community, and at any time I can order dinner for my family and open the door, and it could be these fools, was just devastating. And how can our system allow these people to not only walk amongst us as free people, but to have employment that gives them clear access to the people they victimized?
In July, the state makes an offer. Plead guilty to all 190 counts of abuse of a corpse in exchange for a 20-year prison sentence for John and 15 years for Carrie.
I'm pretty upset that John and Carrie got a plea offer. If you take me and my 4 or 5 closest friends now, and you add up the time that our dead were rotting in that building, it's more than the 20 years that they're being offered.
I think if a jury had to listen to victims' statements and witness the harm that they've caused, the trauma that they've caused to these families, I think they'd get more than 20 years.
I am totally against the plea deal. I want to see them go to trial.
We're still left with troubling questions. Why did the Halfords do this? And what happened to those who are unaccounted for? There is a potential explanation. John had texted his mistress that he was working on a water cremation device. A water cremation is a green process of basically dissolving the body instead of burning it with extreme heat. So was that John's plan, to catch up on the backlog of bodies using this experimental device? Like many aspects of this story, we may never know. John and Carrie Halford may have buried some of the bodies, but I'll tell you, they've definitely buried the truth.
I have nightmares, and I can hear his voice calling my name, and I can't find him. I can't find my son because I don't know what they did with him. And I have a right to know. I trusted them. I trusted them to be the people who were responsible for my son's physical presence for his last moments on this earth. We all trusted them.
I will never be able to think of my son again without also remembering what John and Carrie Halford did to him. They have, in every sense, stripped away the last bits of dignity that our loved ones had. Each one of us has such a tragic and traumatic story through this that our community can't understand. And to now have these bonds with those family members, to consider so many of these people truly my good friends now, means that we are all grieving these losses together.
I remember learning from my bishop how wrong masturbation was, to sin next to murder.
Mormon families are flocking to a high-profile therapist.
The majority of men were under Jody's spell.
Any aspect of the human condition, she could turn it into an addiction.
What the heck is going on in the LDS faith?
Jody? Sounds like a horror movie.